Imagine walking beside me as we move slowly across the moon's quiet surface. You feel the light weight of your suit with each step and notice the soft crunch of dust under your boots. Outside your helmet, the grey plains stretch far and wide, broken only by craters, ridges, and scattered rocks. Watch how the shadows shift across the landscape as sunlight drifts low over the horizon. The hills and valleys around you were formed over billions of years, each marked by impacts and slowly shifting dust. See how the colors are subtle, shades of grey and silver, and feel the calm stillness all around you. Everything you observe is real, mapped and studied by science, yet your mind takes time to grasp the vast emptiness and scale. Before we continue, remember that simple support, like a like or subscribe, helps this work carry on. It may seem small, but it truly matters. Now take a moment, close your eyes, prepare for sleep, and let yourself feel everything around you. Let the journey unfold inside your mind as you drift across the moon's quiet surface, carried by the endless open plains beneath you. You feel the subtle vibration beneath your feet as the shuttle hums quietly, a low and constant sound that reminds you of the engines working steadily. The cabin is calm, almost silent except for this soft hum and the occasional creak of metal settling under the stress of spaceflight. You sit strapped into your seat, the harness snug across your chest, holding you in place as your body floats in a gentle tension that feels heavier than freefall, but lighter than you remember on Earth. Around you, the control panels glow faintly, buttons and screens reflecting soft lights that fill the small cabin with a delicate, technological warmth. You reach out and touch the smooth metal surface next to you, feeling the cool firmness beneath your fingertips, a solid anchor in this floating environment. Through the shuttle's panoramic window, your eyes are drawn to the moon. It grows steadily larger, filling more of your view as the shuttle adjusts its orbit. The surface is grey and varied, a patchwork of light and dark, highlands and plains stretching endlessly in every direction. You notice the Maria first, those large flat areas of basalt that formed from ancient lava flows. They are darker than the surrounding terrain, almost smooth from a distance, but revealing cracks and tiny craters the closer you look. Your eyes follow the ridges that separate these plains, climbing and falling gently like frozen waves, casting shadows that give you a sense of the moon's subtle topography. The highlands are brighter, almost white in contrast, rough and cratered from billions of years of impacts. You see sharp peaks, jagged ridges, and countless depressions, each telling a silent story of cosmic collisions. Your brain tries to grasp the scale. Craters that appear as small indentations from your orbit are actually kilometers across. Some rise like shallow bowls, while others plunge deep into the surface. Shadows stretch across the terrain, sharp and unbroken, because the moon has no atmosphere to scatter light. You can almost feel the cold clarity in the sunlight, so intense that it makes the bright surfaces almost painful to stare at for long periods. As you watch, the Earth hangs in the background, a small, fragile sphere against the infinite black. Blue oceans, white clouds, and brown landmasses swirl gently beneath its thin atmosphere. You feel a tug of familiarity, the only home you have ever known, now distant and fragile. You notice the contrast sharply. The moon is grey, dead, silent, and Earth is alive with colour and movement. You realize that the silence of this orbit is complete. There is no wind, no sound from the surface, just the soft hum of the shuttle and the faint thrum of your own heartbeat. Even your breathing seems louder in comparison, each inhalation and exhalation measured and deliberate. You lean forward slightly, pressing your hands against the window frame, tracing the features below. Tiny craters scatter across the highlands like dents in metal, each one a reminder of the constant rain of meteorites the moon has endured. You spot clusters of rocks, smooth boulders that catch the sunlight and glint like silver in the vast grey sea. There are long, thin grooves and channels carved into some slopes. You imagine the impacts that must have created them, the forces of gravity and momentum playing out in silence over millions of years. The surface is still, yet it speaks volumes if you watch closely, telling the story of formation, erosion, and time. The shuttle begins to tilt slightly as it adjusts its orbit for the landing approach. You feel a gentle pressure shift in your seat, a reminder of the gravitational forces at work. The moon's gravity is only 1/6 of Earth's, and even this subtle tilt makes your body notice the difference. You lean back, letting the shuttle's motion guide your muscles, and you realize that even standing on the floor feels different here. Your legs are lighter, your arms float more easily when you lift them. Every small movement is slower, deliberate. You practice lifting your hand to the window, watching it float and drift almost weightlessly before settling. The surface below changes subtly as you move along the orbit. Shadows lengthen across craters, highlighting the uneven terrain. You notice tiny boulders scattered across the plains, their edges sharp and unweathered. Fine dust coats every surface, the regolith so fine that it can cling to boots and equipment for days. You imagine touching it, running your fingers over the top of a rock, feeling the delicate grit that has been ground by micrometeorite impacts over billions of years. Each particle tells a story of the moon's history, silent and unbroken, unlike anything you have felt on Earth. Looking closer, you spot a few larger craters, some with smaller craters inside them, nested like Russian dolls. The larger depressions have raised rims created by the force of impacts that ejected rock and dust outward. You can see where some material slid down the slopes, forming gentle ridges and subtle waves. The highlands contrast with the Maria here, showing different compositions. The Maria are smoother, darker basalt, while the highlands are lighter and orthosite, jagged and worn. Your eyes trace the line where the two meet, noticing subtle variations in color and texture, evidence of the moon's volcanic and tectonic past. As the shuttle circles, you feel the slow rotation of perspective. Mountains on the horizon shift gradually. Valleys and ridges move under your gaze, revealing new details you missed before. Tiny craters that seemed insignificant at first now appear like miniature landscapes. You focus on one small depression near a flat plain and notice the way sunlight glances off its rim, highlighting tiny cracks and rocks within. You feel a sense of scale that is hard to comprehend. From here, everything looks small and distant, yet you know each feature represents kilometers of space and time. The Earth continues to dominate your view beyond the moon. You follow the swirling clouds, noting their patterns, the way storms form and dissipate. It reminds you of movement and change, of life continuing even while you float silently above the grey, unchanging surface. You watch for a while, noticing how its position seems fixed from this vantage point, even though you know the shuttle is moving at several kilometers per second in orbit. The contrast between the living Earth and the ancient dead moon feels profound, a visual and emotional anchor as you prepare to descend. The shuttle makes a gentle adjustment, lowering its orbit toward the chosen landing site. You feel a slight shift in pressure, a soft vibration that travels through the floor. Your eyes follow the surface below, now showing even more detail. Tiny cracks in the regolith, small stones, and subtle color changes become visible. Shadows from crater rims stretch long across the plains, creating a texture that is almost tactile. You imagine how it would feel to run your fingers over the surface, the fine dust slipping through your gloves, the uneven texture of rocks beneath. You begin to notice subtle ridges that cross the maria, lines that mark ancient lava flows. You trace them with your eyes, following their curves and junctions. Each ridge tells a story of molten rock once flowing across the surface, cooling and solidifying in the thin, airless environment. You spot small craters superimposed on these ridges, evidence of impacts that occurred after the lava had solidified. The moon's surface is a layered history book, each feature telling a moment of its story over billions of years. Your focus shifts to a distant cluster of hills rising from the plains. Their slopes are gentle from orbit, but steep enough to cast shadows, giving a sense of relief. You imagine landing nearby, walking along those slopes, feeling the differences in footing and gravity. The play of light and shadow makes every ridge and depression visible. Even the tiniest rocks catch your attention, glinting in the sunlight, sharp and jagged because nothing has worn them down. You see the delicate patterns in the dust, subtle swirls and streaks created by previous impacts and solar wind exposure. The shuttle begins to align precisely with the future landing coordinates. You watch as the details grow clearer, each movement of the shuttle giving you a slightly different perspective. You see the surface from a new angle, observing craters from the side rather than from above. The shadows provide depth, and you notice how slopes change subtly across hundreds of meters. Your mind begins to prepare for the transition from observation to physical presence, imagining the feeling of stepping onto this surface, the first touch of lunar dust under your boots. As the moon fills your view, you notice the interplay of light and shadow in every feature. Even small ridges have subtle color differences, variations that reveal the mineral composition of the rocks. Darker areas of basalt reflect less light, appearing cooler and denser, while brighter highlands seem almost metallic under the sun's glare. You imagine moving closer, crouching to inspect a rock, feeling its temperature and texture. The low gravity will change the way you handle objects, the way dust reacts when you brush it aside, the way footprints will imprint deeply and remain undisturbed for millions of years. You take a deep breath, feeling the calm of orbit. The moon stretches beneath you, vast and silent, a landscape both alien and tangible. You notice tiny craters on crater rims, ejecta rays radiating outward, slopes so gentle they are barely noticeable from orbit. You imagine how this surface will feel under your hands, how your feet will sink slightly into the regolith, leaving prints that will last far longer than any mark on Earth. Every detail you observe now will guide your first steps, each ridge, crater, and rock a landmark for your immediate journey. The shuttle adjusts slightly, and you feel the gentle tilt of descent starting to prepare for landing. Your body leans with the movement, subtle forces reminding you of the moon's gravity, 1/6 that of Earth. You imagine stepping out onto the surface, the bounce in your step, the slow motion of your movements. Your eyes scan every detail once more, committing to memory the patterns of shadows, the angles of slopes, the textures of plains and ridges. You feel anticipation and calm together, the perfect balance for the first steps of a historic walk on a world other than your own. The moon waits silently below, ready for you to touch it for the very first time, to feel its cold dust, to trace its features with your eyes and hands, to experience its stillness and history in a way no one on Earth could ever truly feel. The shuttle begins a slow tilt, adjusting its course toward the landing site you can see, faintly below. You feel it first in your seat, a subtle lean as the engines fire in short bursts. The vibrations are gentle but definite, a pulse that runs through your fingers as you rest them on the control panel. You can sense the shuttle's micro-adjustments, tiny nudges keeping you steady on the descent path. Every movement is measured, precise, guided by calculations that have been tested over decades. You lean slightly forward, letting your eyes take in the surface, noticing how every ridge, crater, and plain becomes clearer with each second. As the shuttle descends, the grey plains of the Sea of Tranquility expand beneath you. You see more detail now. Small rocks scatter across the surface, casting sharp little shadows. Craters of varying sizes punctuate the land, some shallow and smooth, others steep and jagged. The sunlight glances off certain slopes, making them glimmer faintly, while the shadows fall long and stark. You notice patterns in the regolith, tiny streaks, and textures that mark the direction of previous impacts, and the slow weathering caused by countless micrometeorites. The ground looks fragile, a delicate quilt of dust and rock that stretches farther than your eyes can reach. You feel a light pressure in your stomach as the shuttle tilts slightly again, adjusting to the descent trajectory. Your hands rest on the control panel, feeling the warmth of the instruments beneath your fingers. They are steady and solid, a connection to the shuttle and its careful systems. You notice the screens around you showing altitude, speed, and trajectory. Each number changes slowly, reassuring you that the shuttle is lowering at a safe rate. The descent is slow, deliberate, almost leisurely, but the quiet hum of the engines reminds you that every second matters. Your attention sharpens naturally. You are alert, aware of every shift, every shadow, every movement. Through the window, the lunar surface continues to reveal its secrets. Tiny rocks catch the sunlight and shine briefly, like scattered jewels across a grey sea. You can see the gentle slopes of hills and the raised rims of larger craters. Some craters contain smaller craters within, layers of history pressed into the surface. The regolith is fine and soft-looking, almost powdery, yet you know it is sharp and abrasive to the touch. You imagine reaching out, feeling it with your gloved hand, sensing its weight, its texture, how it might shift slightly under your touch. Even from orbit, the surface communicates its nature. You can tell where rocks are solid, where dust has settled, where tiny slopes might test your balance when you eventually step out. You notice how the shuttle's shadows shift against the surface as it moves. The angles of sunlight stretch across the plains, highlighting even the smallest ridges and depressions. The contrast is striking. Bright surfaces next to deep, dark shadows create a visual depth that makes the moon feel three-dimensional even from a distance. You feel your eyes adjusting constantly, scanning every detail. The hills in the distance are rising slowly into view. They are gentle slopes, but they provide a reference point for the vast, flat expanses of the plains. You follow the ridgelines with your eyes, noticing how some rocks cluster at their base, scattered like tiny pebbles in a desert on Earth. Inside the shuttle, you feel the subtle motion as the thrusters fire again. There is no jolt, only a gentle push that moves you imperceptibly forward. Your body sways slightly in your harness. The harness straps press lightly against your shoulders, grounding you in the quiet stillness of space. You reach up and adjust them, feeling the soft padding and the metal buckles. Every tactile sensation reminds you of your presence here, your connection to this machine, and your responsibility to follow every procedure carefully. You notice the temperature inside the cabin, comfortably controlled, a stark contrast to the extreme cold and heat waiting outside. The lunar surface below becomes more intricate as you approach closer. Small craters, previously blurred into the plains, now reveal sharp edges and smooth interiors. Tiny rocks glint in the sunlight. The regolith is marked by faint streaks, the subtle traces of ancient impacts that shifted dust and stone in delicate patterns. You notice areas where lighter dust has been blown across darker basalt, creating soft lines and textures. Your mind begins to imagine what it will feel like to walk across this terrain, each step pressing into a surface that has been untouched for millions of years. You anticipate the bounce in your gait from the moon's lower gravity, 1/6 of what you feel on Earth. You can already picture your movements, slow, deliberate, graceful in the unfamiliar weight. As the shuttle continues its descent, you see the landing site more clearly. It is a flat plain, chosen carefully to avoid rocks and slopes that could challenge your landing. You notice subtle variations in the texture of the dust, tiny bumps and depressions that might alter your footing. You follow the edges of nearby craters, observing the angles of their rims, the slopes within. Each feature gives you clues about the surface's history and composition. The Maria, smoother and darker, contrast with the lighter highlands nearby. You see how these areas formed from ancient lava flows, solidified billions of years ago, and how subsequent impacts have sculpted the land into the patterns before you. The shuttle tilts slightly again, a slow, precise maneuver, aligning with the calculated descent path. You feel a mild shift in your weight as your body responds to the gentle acceleration. Your hands rest lightly on the panel, following the instruments, feeling their warmth. The controls are responsive, perfectly tuned to the shuttle's movements. You notice the way your body reacts, balancing against the subtle forces, your legs bracing slightly, your arms floating just enough to sense the motion. It is a strange combination of weight and weightlessness, a delicate balance that only exists in this environment. You study the surface with focus, noting tiny clusters of boulders and scattered rocks. Some are smooth and rounded, while others are jagged, clearly fractured by the force of impacts. Shadows deepen in small craters, creating pockets of darkness that make you wonder about hidden slopes and angles. You trace the contours of larger hills and ridges, observing the patterns left by lava flows and ejecta from collisions. Even at this height, you sense the moon's texture, the way dust collects in depressions, the subtle undulations of plains, the sharp edges of craters that have survived billions of years. The light changes as the shuttle moves. Shadows stretch and shrink, altering your perception of depth and scale. Sunlight glances off rocks, creating tiny points of brightness that draw your eye. You notice the subtle shifts in tone across the surface, areas that are darker, cooler, or slightly warmer in appearance. You imagine running your gloved hand over a small boulder, feeling its temperature, its rough edges, the way dust clings to its surface. You picture stepping down from the shuttle, leaving footprints that will last indefinitely, marking your presence on this ancient landscape. Every adjustment of the shuttle brings the landing site into sharper view. You observe the delicate balance between flat plains and small obstacles. Rocks that looked insignificant from orbit now present themselves as landmarks or potential challenges. You follow the path your feet will take, planning mentally each step, imagining the light bouncing off dust and rocks with every hop and stride. Your anticipation grows, paired with calm awareness. The surface is unforgiving, yet it is beautiful, and every detail you see prepares you for the moment you will finally touch it. The shuttle makes its final, micro adjustments, aligning precisely with the landing coordinates. You feel a slight forward tilt, the engines firing in measured pulses to control descent speed. Your body sways slightly in response, harness straps pressing reassuringly against your shoulders. You follow the instruments, the altimeter slowly counting down, the visual feed showing ever more detail. Craters are sharper, rocks more defined. Shadows create depth and perspective. You can see the texture of the regolith, the scattered boulders, the gentle slopes that surround your future path. You notice a few very small craters near the center of the landing zone, shallow depressions that will require careful navigation once you step out. The moon stretches beneath you, silent and still, vast and unbroken. Every ridge, every crater, every small rock is a feature to guide your first steps. You feel the subtle tug of the moon's gravity, the 1/6 pull that will shape your movements and your perception of balance. You imagine the bounce in your step, the gentle lift as you move across the plains, the slow arc of your arm as you reach to touch a rock. Your senses heighten naturally. Sight, touch, and awareness of motion are keen. You are ready to transition from observer to explorer, to move from orbit to surface, and to feel the moon itself beneath your boots for the very first time. The hatch slides open with a gentle hiss, a sound that seems loud in the quiet cabin. You feel the subtle pull of pressure changing around you, a faint sensation that reminds you the shuttle is no longer fully isolated. Your gloved hands rest on the edge of the doorway, gripping firmly as you peer out at the surface below. The grey expanse stretches endlessly, smooth plains interrupted by jagged craters, scattered rocks, and faint ridges. The sunlight strikes the surface directly, creating sharp contrasts between bright areas and deep shadows. Every detail stands out as if etched into the landscape. You lean forward carefully, feeling the pull of gravity that is far weaker than on Earth. Your body responds differently here. Even the smallest motion feels light, almost buoyant. As you place your first foot on the ladder, you notice the way your muscles adjust, the slight hesitation in your balance. Then, slowly, you let yourself descend the last step, and your boot meets the regolith. There is a tiny bounce, a sensation unlike any step on Earth. The fine dust shifts beneath your weight, moving slightly before settling back into place. You reach out with your other hand, letting it brush the shuttle's frame for stability, feeling the cool metal and the soft vibrations from the engines above. Looking out across the plain, your eyes are drawn to the details around you. The shadows are sharp and dark, stretching across craters and rocks in a high contrast pattern. Every slope, ridge, and depression stands in relief. You notice tiny pebbles scattered across the dust, some smooth, some jagged. The larger boulders catch the sunlight and sparkle faintly, their edges rough and fractured. You see marks on the surface, shallow grooves and depressions where previous astronauts have walked. Footprints are clear and precise, pressed into the dust, enduring far longer than any print could survive on Earth. You imagine reaching down to touch them, feeling the regolith shift slightly beneath your gloved fingers. The air around you is not air at all, but inside your suit, you feel a controlled flow of oxygen, warm and safe. You notice a faint smell of the suit materials, the scent of fabric, plastic, and metal warmed by your body. It is subtle but grounding, a reminder of the technology keeping you alive in this harsh environment. You hear nothing from outside. There is no wind, no animals, no distant sounds at all. The radio transmits the quiet voices of mission control and your own movements. But beyond the suit and shuttle, Silence reigns. It is absolute and deep, a presence that fills your awareness. You take a careful step forward, the low gravity allowing a slight bounce in your stride. The regolith gives beneath your boots, fine and powdery yet slightly compacted, where larger rocks rest. You feel it press into your soles, shifting under pressure and then settling. Each movement is deliberate. You lift your leg slightly higher than usual, then allow it to drop gently. Your balance adjusts naturally, your body learning to work with 1/6 the pull of Earth. You notice how far a single stride carries you, longer than normal, with a lightness that feels almost like floating. The moon's surface reveals countless features as you move. Craters of various sizes pock the plains. Some are shallow and smooth, formed long ago, while others are deep and jagged from more recent impacts. You can see tiny rocks scattered within crater rims, ejecta thrown outward in delicate patterns. You lean closer to one, imagining the energy that must have created it, the speed of an object striking the surface and carving a cavity in the solid rock and dust. Every feature tells a story, a record of time written in stone and dust, unchanging and enduring. You notice the texture of the regolith in more detail. It is made of tiny particles, fine and sharp, formed over billions of years by repeated meteorite impacts that crushed rocks into dust. The surface is covered with a mix of crushed rock, dust, and small fragments of mineral crystals. You imagine running your fingers over it, feeling the grit, imagining the way it clings lightly to the fabric of your gloves. Each step you take disturbs it slightly, sending small clouds of dust shifting downward and settling. The dust looks uniform from a distance, but up close, it is varied with subtle color differences, tiny grains of different minerals sparkling in the sunlight. Nearby, you see a small cluster of rocks and boulders. Their surfaces are rough and fractured, some with sharp edges, others worn smooth. Shadows fall into every crack, highlighting ridges and indentations. You notice how the sunlight illuminates certain surfaces, creating a stark contrast that makes the textures almost tactile to your eyes. Your gaze shifts across the plain, noting the gentle slopes that rise toward distant hills. Even from this landing site, the scale is impressive. Small features are clear, yet the horizon stretches far beyond, unbroken, a grey landscape that seems to go on forever. Footprints from previous missions catch your attention. Each one is sharp and well-defined, the toes and heels clearly visible in the dust. You imagine stepping near them, feeling the surface press beneath your boots as your weight leaves a mark that will remain for centuries. You notice subtle differences between prints, how the dust around them shifts, and how the edges are sharp where boots lifted away. It gives a sense of continuity, the knowledge that humans have walked here before, leaving traces that are almost permanent. The sun is high above, casting light that is undiluted by atmosphere. Shadows are stark and deep, creating an almost graphic contrast across the plains. You observe how every bump and ridge throws its own shadow, how tiny rocks create pinpoints of darkness next to bright surfaces. The light is constant, unfiltered and brilliant. You squint slightly, feeling the intensity through your visor. Even in shade, the surface remains visible, the details clear, and the textures defined. You can see the subtle layering in crater walls, faint lines of regolith that tell of dust settling over time, of impacts depositing tiny fragments across the plains. You take a small hop, adjusting to the reduced gravity. Your motion is smooth, effortless, each jump carrying you farther than it would on Earth. You land lightly, feeling the dust compress under your boots, and then settle again. The sensation is strange and exhilarating, a gentle buoyancy that changes how you navigate the surface. You notice how your arms float slightly as you move, how your body balances differently, each motion slower and more deliberate. The moon's pull is gentle, yet consistent, shaping everything you do. Nearby, a shallow crater catches your eye. Its rim is jagged, uneven, and shadowed. You step toward it, your feet sinking slightly into the soft dust with each step. You look inside, observing rocks embedded in the sides, small fragments scattered across the floor. The layers of dust are visible, compacted in some areas, loose in others. You imagine the impact that formed it, the energy released, the rock hurled outward. Every crater, every ridge, every stone is a record of forces that shaped this landscape long before humans arrived. Your senses take in everything around you. The sharp edges of boulders, the soft powder of the dust, the stark light and shadows, the complete silence. Even your breathing and heartbeat feel amplified inside the suit, reminders of life and presence in a world otherwise still. You bend slightly to examine a small rock, noting its shape and texture. You imagine picking it up, feeling the weightlessness and the unusual density compared to Earth rocks. Each object is unique, each feature telling a story of formation, erosion, and the passage of time. The plains stretch far into the distance. You notice subtle ridges formed by ancient lava flows, faint lines tracing patterns across the surface. Small craters sit along these ridges, evidence of impacts occurring after the lava solidified. You can follow the paths in your mind, imagining how each layer of history has been built, one upon another. The texture of the regolith varies subtly with each step, some areas smoother, some marked with tiny depressions and fragments. Your feet adjust naturally, learning the contours, absorbing the gentle irregularities beneath you. You pause for a moment, standing still on the lunar surface. The silence is profound, almost overwhelming. You hear only the soft whir of your suit's life support system, the distant radio from mission control, the faint mechanical sounds of the shuttle in the background. Every other sound is absent. The stillness allows you to see details you might otherwise miss. Tiny cracks in rocks, faint streaks in the dust, the subtle curve of the horizon. Your eyes sweep slowly, taking in hills, craters, plains, and distant ridges, memorizing the textures and angles that will guide your movements. The sunlight moves slowly across the surface, shifting shadows and illuminating different features. You notice how even slight changes in angle create new patterns of light and dark. The textures of the regolith become more pronounced, the boulders more defined, and the slopes sharper. You take a careful step, then another, feeling the dust shift under your boots and the gentle bounce of low gravity with each stride. The surface is unyielding yet delicate, a paradox that demands both respect and curiosity. You imagine the Apollo astronauts walking here decades ago, the continuity of human presence on a world so far from Earth, their footprints lasting alongside yours. You lean down, brushing your gloved hand over the surface. The dust feels slightly rough, the particles fine and sharp, clinging lightly to your glove. Rocks and pebbles shift slightly as you touch them, responding to even the gentlest pressure. The moon is tactile in a way that is new, strange, and unforgettable. You rise and continue walking slowly, taking deliberate steps, observing every change in terrain. The horizon remains distant, the plains stretching endlessly, but the features beneath your feet are immediate, intimate, and alive with the history of a world untouched for millions of years. Each moment on the surface deepens your awareness. You see the contrast between smooth plains and jagged highlands, between shadowed craters and sunlit rocks. You feel the pull of gravity, the bounce of each step, the fine dust under your boots. Your ears pick up only what your suit allows. Your eyes drink in the stark clarity of light and shadow, and your mind records every ridge, crater, and stone. You are fully present, walking where humans have walked before, yet experiencing it as if for the first time. The moon's surface unfolding beneath you in silence, light, and texture. You begin to walk across the lunar surface, each step deliberate and careful. The low gravity makes your movements feel different, almost like slow-motion dancing. You lift one leg and let it fall gently, noticing how your body rises slightly with each step before settling back down. There is a light bounce in your stride, a sensation that makes moving across the plain effortless yet unfamiliar. Your boots press into the fine dust, leaving prints that will remain long after you move on. Each footprint is clear, the edges crisp, and the powdery regolith shifts lightly under your weight before settling again. As you move, you reach down and touch a small rock. The surface is rough and sharp, made of tiny crystalline structures that glint faintly in the sunlight. You run your fingers over its edges, feeling how solid and dense it is compared to earth rocks. Nearby, smaller pebbles are scattered across the dust, varying in shape, color, and texture. Some are dark basalt, remnants of ancient lava flows, while others are lighter anorthosite from the highlands. You notice that even the smallest rocks are fractured and jagged, formed over billions of years by impacts and exposure to the harsh environment. Your eyes sweep across the surface, noting tiny craters and shallow depressions. Some are perfect circles, others irregular, evidence of the different angles and forces at which meteoroids struck. You step carefully around these features, watching how the shadows stretch across their rims. The sunlight is stark and direct, creating a high contrast that sharpens every edge, every detail. You lean slightly forward to examine one crater closely, noticing the layered walls, small rocks embedded within, and subtle variations in color that hint at the materials beneath the surface. You imagine the impact that created it, the sudden explosion of energy, and the way debris was thrown outward in delicate patterns. A gentle slope rises nearby, and you make your way toward it. The gradient is subtle, but you feel the change in footing as you walk. Dust shifts beneath your boots, tiny particles skimming across the surface before settling. Boulders pepper the slope, some large enough to require careful navigation. You reach out with a gloved hand, brushing lightly against a rock to steady yourself. Its surface is coarse and uneven, and the light catches on its crystalline edges. You feel the texture in your fingertips, sensing the history written in its formation. Each stone is a record of collisions, lava flows, and slow changes over countless years. You pause and take in the horizon. The moon curves slightly, revealing the vast expanse of the plains and distant highlands. Mountains rise in the distance, jagged and dark against the pale grey surface. You recognize the Montes Appenninos, their slopes sharp and rising from the surrounding plains. They are silent and imposing, a reminder of the moon's ancient geological forces. You imagine walking toward them someday, tracing the ridges and valleys, feeling the subtle differences in dust and rock under your boots. Even from here, the scale is immense, and you feel the smallness of your presence in comparison to the vast landscape. The earth hangs above the horizon, a vibrant blue and white jewel against the black sky. Its position appears almost fixed, unmoving, yet you know you are orbiting alongside it, You watch the clouds swirl slowly, the oceans glinting in sunlight. The contrast with the moon is striking. A living, dynamic world above a grey, static surface. You feel a sense of perspective, aware of your distance and the fragile beauty of the planet you call home. The contrast reminds you of the moon's unique qualities, its lack of atmosphere, its silent expanses, and the permanence of its features. As you continue to explore, you notice patterns in the surface created by impacts over time. Craters cluster in certain areas, some overlapping others, showing the sequence of collisions. You step along a gentle ridge, observing how dust has settled in lines and streaks, forming subtle textures across the surface. You see areas of smoother terrain, ancient lava plains that contrast sharply with the rough, cratered highlands. Each type of terrain tells a story. The Maria formed from volcanic activity billions of years ago. The highlands from the moon's early crust, heavily bombarded and sculpted by meteoroids. You reach down and scoop a small amount of dust into your gloved hand, letting it sift slowly between your fingers. It is fine, almost powdery, yet gritty under pressure. You can feel its weight, light compared to earth soil, and the way it clings slightly to your glove. The dust is formed from countless impacts, each particle a fragment of rock pulverized over eons. You notice subtle variations in color, tiny crystals catching the sunlight. Even the smallest pinch tells a story, a record of the moon's long and quiet history. Moving across the plains, you step over tiny ridges and small crater rims. The bounce of low gravity makes your stride feel longer, your movements more fluid. You lean forward slightly as you descend a shallow depression, letting your hands brush against the fine dust for balance. Rocks embedded in the surface catch your eye, fractured and scattered, evidence of meteoroids striking at varying angles. You trace their edges with your eyes, noticing the way light and shadow reveal the details of cracks and layers. Each rock is different, a small monument to the moon's constant exposure to space. You look toward the distant mountains again. Their slopes and ridges stand in stark relief against the pale plains. You notice subtle changes in tone along their flanks, darker areas where shadows fall, lighter where sunlight hits directly. The terrain is silent, unchanging, yet full of history. You imagine the forces that form these mountains, the crust cracking, lava flowing, material collapsing into valleys. You feel your steps echo in the mind, the gentle bounce, the movement of dust, the sense of scale that makes every stride both careful and deliberate. The sunlight moves slowly across the landscape. Shadows stretch and shift, revealing new details with each passing moment. Tiny cracks in rocks become visible. Small pebbles stand out, and faint lines in the dust mark subtle undulations. You step lightly toward a small crater, observing its walls and floor. Layers of dust and rock tell a story of accumulation over time, of impacts both large and small. You notice fragments within the crater, sharp and angular, as if frozen in place. Your mind traces the sequence of events, imagining each impact, each flash of energy, each scattering of debris across the surface. You continue walking, letting your eyes wander across the nearby terrain. Small boulders catch your attention, some partly buried in dust, others resting above the surface. Shadows define their edges, emphasizing their shapes. You reach down to touch one, feeling the rough surface through your glove. The rock is dense and solid, crystalline grains visible in the sunlight. You lift your hand slowly, letting the dust fall away, leaving tiny particles suspended for a moment before settling. The texture and weight are unfamiliar, yet fascinating. a direct connection to the moon's ancient processes. Looking outward, you see clusters of small craters forming patterns across the plains. You step carefully along their edges, observing the ejecta rays, the lines of dust and rock thrown outward by impacts. You notice overlapping craters, some older and eroded, others fresh and sharp. The contrast between the smooth maria and the rugged highlands is evident. You can see how volcanic plains have been shaped over time, how highlands have endured billions of years of bombardment. Each feature is a window into a different era of lunar history. You pause briefly, letting your eyes sweep over the plain. The surface is vast and silent, yet rich with detail. Each ridge, each crater, each stone is part of a long story written in dust and rock. The bounce in your step continues, the low gravity making movement effortless yet deliberate. You reach out to brush dust from a small rock, feeling its texture, imagining the energy that created it, and tracing the history embedded in every surface. Your senses are alert, your body in rhythm with this alien world, every step a tactile and visual experience. The earth remains in the sky, a constant point of reference. Its blue oceans and swirling clouds contrast sharply with the monochrome lunar landscape. You feel the stability of its presence as you move across the surface, a reminder of home and of distance. Each step you take on the moon deepens your connection to both worlds, the silent grey beneath your boots and the living planet above. Your gaze follows distant ridges, small hills, and the gentle slopes of plains, memorizing each feature that will guide your exploration in the hours ahead. The low gravity continues to shape your movement. You hop lightly over a small depression, landing softly and letting dust shift under your boots. Rocks and pebbles crunch faintly, heard only through the vibrations in your suit and boots. You notice subtle patterns in the dust, lines and streaks formed by past impacts. You trace these with your eyes, imagining the meteorites striking at different speeds and angles, leaving behind the textures you see today. The surface is ancient, quiet, and precise, each detail telling a story that spans millions of years. You step toward a larger crater nearby, examining the subtle variations in slope and texture. Its walls are layered, dust and rock compacted differently in each layer. Small stones embedded within the crater reflect sunlight, crystalline edges catching your eye. You reach down with your gloved hand to feel the surface, imagining the forces that shaped it. Your senses are fully engaged, sight, touch, motion, and the faint hum of your suit's life support. Every step, every glance, every breath feels intentional, part of a direct experience with a world untouched for so long. Continuing your exploration, you follow the gentle undulations of the plains, observing the patterns left by ancient impacts. Craters of all sizes scatter across the surface, some merging with others, some standing alone. You notice subtle differences in dust texture, darker areas formed from basalt flows, lighter areas from highland and orthosite. Your mind traces the history embedded in these features, visualizing volcanic activity, meteoroid bombardment, and the slow, quiet accumulation of regolith. Each step deepens your understanding. Each detail immerses you further into this alien yet tangible landscape. You look across the horizon once more. Mountains rise in the distance, small craters punctuate the plains, and boulders catch the sunlight at odd angles. The earth remains suspended above, stationary and vivid. You feel the connection between observation and movement, between touch and sight. Every hop, every step, every glance brings you closer to understanding this environment. The moon is silent, stark, and unchanging, yet full of details waiting for your senses to discover. You walk slowly, deliberately, fully aware of every grain of dust, every shadow, every rock that lies along your path. You are immersed, present, and connected to this landscape in a way that is immediate, personal, and unforgettable. You pause as a cluster of rocks catches your attention, scattered across the flat plain. Each one is different, and you move closer, letting your boots sink slightly into the soft dust with every step. You bend down, reaching out with your gloved hand, and pick up a small basalt stone. It feels surprisingly solid, heavier than you expected given the low gravity. You let it rest in your palm, feeling the weightlessness interact with your sense of pressure. The rock floating lightly yet tangible. The surface is rough, covered in tiny crystalline grains that glint faintly in the sunlight. You turn it slowly, observing every edge, every facet, every tiny fracture. The rock has a story written in its shape, in its texture, in the pattern of its crystals. Nearby, a larger boulder reveals more complexity. Its surface is fractured, jagged, and layered. You run your gloved fingers across one edge, feeling the uneven texture and imagining the force that created it. This is a breccia, you realize, a rock formed from fragments of other rocks fused together by ancient impacts. You examine the layers closely, noting how some are darker, others lighter, and how tiny specks of minerals glimmer in the sunlight. You can see evidence of compression, of melting and reformation, a record of the moon's violent history that spans billions of years. Each line, each crack, each shard is a silent record of energy, time, and space. As you move across the surface, you notice subtle changes in the dust around rocks. The regolith is deeper in some areas, shallower in others, the texture changing with the presence of larger stones and ejecta from distant impacts. You kneel slightly to examine a shallow crater. Brushing your hand over the rim, you feel the difference in compactness, the way dust has settled differently on slopes versus flat surfaces. Tiny fragments of rock glint in the light, and you notice faint lines that suggest layering, perhaps from multiple impacts over millions of years. The sunlight catches these layers, highlighting subtle variations in color and texture. You follow the lines with your eyes, tracing the history recorded in each layer of the moon's surface. You pick up another small stone, this one lighter, a piece of anorthosite from the highlands. The texture is smoother, yet still firm, and the color contrasts sharply with the darker basalt. You feel the difference immediately, the light reflecting off its surface, giving it a slight sparkle. You imagine the mineral composition, mostly plagioclase, and think about how this rock formed long ago when the moon's crust solidified. Holding it, you sense the age embedded in its grains, the quiet solidity of a world untouched by wind or water for billions of years. You pass it from hand to hand, feeling how your motion is slowed and softened by low gravity, each adjustment deliberate, precise. You turn to a nearby crater, observing the ejecta blanket surrounding it. Dust and small rocks radiate outward, a record of the impact that formed the depression. You step carefully closer, noting the layering within the ejecta, larger fragments sitting atop finer dust. Each piece tells a story, where it came from, how it traveled, how it settled. You imagine the speed at which the meteoroid struck, the energy released in an instant, and the way the surface responded. Your eyes trace the lines of debris, the subtle changes in slope and texture, observing how older impacts have been overlaid by newer ones, creating a complex tapestry of lunar history. The sunlight continues to reveal subtle color variations in the rocks and dust. Shadows enhance the texture of every surface. You notice how some basalt rocks are darker, almost black in certain angles, while others are grey with a hint of brown. The highland stones appear pale, almost white, yet tinged with soft yellow or pink hues in the crystalline grains. You reach down and touch a small fragment, feeling the uneven texture, noting how the dust clings slightly to your glove. Light plays across the surface differently depending on angle, giving the impression of tiny flashes as you shift your hand or move your eyes. You step toward a small cluster of rocks partially embedded in the regolith. Picking up a piece of breccia, you feel its weight, slightly heavier than the basalt you held earlier. Its surface is rough and jagged, with embedded fragments clearly visible. You turn it in your hand, examining each shard, noticing how they are fused together. It is a testament to the moon's history of bombardment, to the countless collisions that have shaped its surface. You imagine the meteorite that fractured these rocks, the explosion of energy, and how fragments from distant impacts came together to form a single piece. Each touch reinforces the reality of the moon's violent, unchanging environment. You notice subtle layering inside nearby craters, evidence of successive impacts over time. You crouch slightly to observe a shallow crater, its walls marked by tiny fractures and embedded fragments. Dust has settled in different ways across its rim, highlighting the contours. You follow the layers with your fingers, feeling the differences in compactness and texture. Larger fragments sit atop finer grains, evidence of ejecta and gravitational settling. You observe how these layers tell a story of accumulation, of age, and of constant change over eons, even on a world without water or wind to shape it further. The regolith beneath your boots shows subtle differences as you move. Near rocks and craters, it is compacted, deeper, with tiny fragments mixed in. On smoother plains, the dust is fine and powdery, shifting slightly with each step. You reach down to scoop up a small handful, letting it slip slowly between your gloved fingers. The grains are jagged and rough, formed by repeated impacts that pulverized rocks over billions of years. You notice faint sparkles of minerals, tiny flecks catching the sunlight. Each handful is a miniature history, lesson, a tactile connection to the processes that have shaped the moon. As you continue, you observe sunlight reflecting differently off each rock type. Dark basalt absorbs light, appearing dense and heavy, while lighter anorthosite and breccia reflect more, shimmering slightly as you move. You take a step back and let your eyes sweep across the landscape. Craters, boulders, and small ridges form patterns that hint at the moon's violent past. Ejecta blankets from ancient impacts stretch across plains, layering older debris with newer fragments. You notice where regolith has collected in depressions, where dust is thinner on slopes, and where small rocks have been scattered outward, revealing subtle lines of history across the surface. You pick up another fragment, a small angular piece of basalt. Its weight is perceptible, though reduced by low gravity. You feel it press lightly into your glove, sense its density, and note its rough edges. The sunlight catches the crystals, embedded in the rock, making them sparkle faintly. You turn it slowly, observing the subtle color variations, the embedded fragments, the tiny fractures. This single rock tells a story of impacts, heating, and solidification. It is a piece of the moon's long history, preserved in the harsh, unchanging environment. Moving across the plain, you notice how craters overlap. Older craters are shallow, their edges worn by time and dust, while newer impacts are sharper, more defined. You step along the edges of one, observing how ejecta has spread outward, smaller rocks intermingled with fine dust. You imagine the trajectory of each fragment, how far it traveled, how it settled in place. Your gloved hand brushes against a small ridge, feeling the fine grains of dust, the rough edges of stones embedded within. Every touch, every glance, deepens your understanding of the moon's surface and history. You crouch slightly to examine a large boulder near the crater's rim. Its surface is rough and fractured, covered with tiny crystals that sparkle faintly in the sunlight. You run your fingers over it, feeling the texture, imagining the impact that formed it, the forces that fractured it, the dust that settled over it. Each fragment within the rock tells a story, a record of past collisions and energy. You lift it slightly, feeling the interplay between its real weight and the reduced pull of gravity. It floats in your palm lightly, yet the solid texture reminds you of the immense forces that shaped it. Sunlight moves across the surface, shifting shadows and revealing new details. You notice subtle color variations, differences in texture, and small cracks in rocks you passed earlier. You pick up another stone, a piece of anorthosite, smooth and pale, holding it against the light. Tiny crystalline grains shimmer softly, giving insight into the moon's early crust formation. You compare it with the darker basalt and the fragmented breccia, realizing how each type of rock reveals a different chapter in lunar history. The Maria and highlands are distinct not only in appearance, but in composition and story, a geological record frozen in time. You continue to explore, stepping lightly over small ridges and depressions. The dust shifts under your boots, forming tiny clouds that settle almost instantly. You kneel to examine a cluster of small rocks, feeling their surfaces, noting embedded fragments, and observing sunlight reflecting off crystalline grains. Each stone is a record, a tactile and visual story. The moon's surface is a layered history, written in basalt, anorthosite, breccia, and dust. You sense the vast timescale it represents, the quiet continuity of a world untouched by wind or water, shaped only by impacts and time. You pause and sweep your eyes across the plains. Craters, boulders, ridges, and distant hills form a vast pattern, each feature part of a timeline stretching back billions of years. Ejecta blankets and layered deposits are visible, subtle, yet precise. You step slowly toward a crater rim, brushing your hand across the surface, feeling the texture of dust and small stones. Each touch, each glance, deepens your connection to the moon. You are part of its history for a moment, yet the surface remains unchanging, silent and eternal. The rocks in your hands, the dust under your boots, the sunlight on every surface, all combine to tell the story of a world that has existed, undisturbed, for billions of years. You continue your journey, leaving the cluster of rocks behind, stepping carefully across the smooth plains. Each stride carries you farther, your body adjusting naturally to the gentle pull of lunar gravity. The dust shifts softly beneath your boots, settling slowly with each step. You notice small ridges and shallow depressions, subtle undulations in the terrain that are easy to miss at first glance. Your eyes follow them carefully, tracing the contours, observing how light and shadow define every slope. Even the tiniest variation in the surface is visible here, highlighted by the unfiltered sunlight that casts crisp shadows across the grey plains. Ahead, a series of small hills rises gradually from the flat expanse. You adjust your stride, hopping lightly to cross shallow depressions, feeling the slight lift in your legs with each step. The bounce is gentle, controlled, and almost effortless. You take a moment to scan the terrain, noting how the plains stretch between you and the hills, scattered with tiny rocks and subtle ridges. The scale of the moon is striking. You are walking alone across a vast, silent landscape. The horizon curves gently, revealing distant mountains whose jagged peaks rise far above the plains. You feel both the enormity of the emptiness around you and the clarity of the features in front of you. The sunlight moves slowly, and with it, shadows lengthen across the plains. You observe the changing angles, how shadows stretch over ridges and rocks, giving depth to the landscape. Every small slope and depression becomes more defined as the light shifts. You note the position of the shadows and realize how this gives you a sense of time passing. The sun is your clock, its movement across the sky, measured by the changing patterns on the lunar surface. You lean slightly, following the lengthening shadow of a boulder with your eyes, noticing how even small rocks cast elongated, precise lines across the fine dust. You step closer to a low ridge, examining its features. Tiny pebbles are embedded in the regolith, creating microtopography that only becomes clear when you look closely. You feel the subtle change underfoot as you walk over slightly raised dust, your boots brushing against small rocks hidden in the surface. The slopes are gentle, yet each step requires attention. You reach down to touch a patch of fine dust, letting it sift slowly through your gloved fingers. It is jagged and powdery, delicate in its granularity, a record of countless small impacts over billions of years. The patterns in the dust reveal tiny ridges and miniature craters, micro-variations that speak to the ongoing processes shaping the surface. Moving across the plains, you approach a chain of small craters. They are shallow but well-defined, arranged in a loose line that stretches across the landscape. You step along their rims, noticing how the sunlight illuminates different faces of the crater walls. Each depression contains fine dust, and small rocks lie scattered within. You follow the edges with your gaze, observing subtle layering where ejecta has fallen, and the variations in slope that indicate the direction of past impacts. These crater chains offer clues to the forces that shape the terrain, the energy of collisions, and the pattern of meteoroid strikes over millions of years. You pause on a slight rise, allowing your eyes to sweep over the vast emptiness around you. The plains stretch endlessly, broken only by ridges, small craters, and scattered boulders. In the distance, the mountains rise sharply, their peaks casting long shadows across the surface. You feel the immense scale of the moon, the emptiness around you emphasizing both the smallness of your presence and the permanence of the features around you. The horizon curves subtly, the light revealing subtle changes in elevation, slopes, and textures that your eyes trace with fascination. Each step forward carries you further into this quiet, unchanging world. As you move, you note tiny rocks that litter the plains. Some are embedded in the regolith, others sit lightly on the surface, each casting a small shadow that highlights its shape. Dust has gathered around them in delicate patterns, subtle ridges formed by the settling of fine particles. You stop to examine one, feeling the surface with your gloved hand, noting its rough edges and crystalline grains. Even the smallest rocks are rich in detail, revealing fractures and layers formed long ago. Each touch connects you to the history of the moon, to the constant accumulation of impacts and the slow shaping of the surface over time. You observe the subtle slopes along the plains. Shallow depressions form faint valleys, barely visible until sunlight falls across them at an angle. You step carefully, letting your boots glide over these variations, feeling the shift in footing. Each movement gives you a sense of the surface's texture and the way gravity influences your stride. You notice patterns where dust has gathered in low spots, where micro-erosion from impacts has shifted particles, and where tiny rocks create delicate ridges. Your eyes sweep along the lines of these features, mapping them mentally as you move, noting differences in height, depth, and texture. The sunlight continues to shift across the surface. Shadows stretch and shorten, revealing new contours, emphasizing the depth of small craters and the angles of ridges. You watch the interplay of light and shadow on each rock and slope, seeing details that change subtly with every step. The patterns of light highlight the shapes of the hills in the distance, their slopes alternating between dark-shadowed faces and bright sunlit sides. You feel the passing of time through these changes, the slow motion of light revealing the moon's topography in a continuous, observable way. You approach a low ridge that separates two shallow plains. Dust and small rocks scatter across its surface, creating subtle textures and variations. You step along the ridge, feeling the difference beneath your boots. The light reflects off tiny crystals in the dust, catching your attention and drawing your gaze across the slope. Each movement of your feet displaces fine grains, sending them floating slightly before settling back down. You observe how the ridge forms a natural boundary between planes, the gentle slope directing the flow of dust during impacts and creating subtle changes in elevation that are visible even from a distance. A cluster of small craters ahead marks the path you will follow. You examine their rims, noticing the layering in ejecta blankets and the subtle depressions where dust has collected. The craters are uneven, some shallow, others slightly deeper, yet all formed by impacts over time. You step carefully, letting your boots brush lightly against the rims, feeling the compacted dust beneath your soles. Each crater provides a reference point for your movement across the landscape, a natural marker in a world without roads, trees, or other familiar signs of direction. You pause to look back at the plains you have crossed. The surface stretches far behind you, marked by shallow ridges, small rocks, and scattered craters. You note the subtle variations in dust texture, the different shades of grey across the plains, and the small hills that rise gently from the surface. Shadows shift with the movement of the sun, highlighting details you may have overlooked on the first pass. Your gaze travels over every feature, mentally mapping the terrain, preparing for further exploration, and understanding the layout of this lunar environment. You continue forward toward the hills in the distance. Each step carries you farther across the undulating surface. Dust shifts lightly under your boots, micro-topography altering your stride, tiny rocks and ridges requiring constant observation. You notice small variations in slope, subtle lines in the regolith, and patterns formed by impacts over time. Your eyes trace these patterns, observing how the surface changes with elevation, how shadows deepen in slight depressions, and how sunlight illuminates different facets of the terrain. Every detail is important, every movement deliberate, as you survey and map this alien landscape. The mountains ahead rise gradually, their slopes dotted with boulders and small ridges. You approach slowly, hopping lightly over shallow depressions. Dust shifts beneath your boots, tiny particles brushing against the soles and clinging lightly to your gloves. You examine rocks along the slopes, noting fractures, layering, and crystalline structures. You step carefully around small craters, observing the ejecta and depth of each depression. The terrain is complex, subtle, yet readable through careful observation, giving you a sense of both history and scale. You feel the vast emptiness around you, yet every step reveals more detail. Every glance uncovers new features. Looking across the horizon, you see the distant mountains and plains stretching endlessly. Shadows deepen as sunlight moves, creating a constantly changing perspective. You notice the smallest details in the microtopography, the angle of tiny ridges, the alignment of rocks, the way dust has settled in depressions. You step lightly, letting your movements interact with the surface, observing how each footfall disturbs fine particles and shifts them slightly. The lunar surface is alive in its subtle motions, responding to your presence while remaining ancient and unchanging. Every step is both scientific observation and physical experience, a direct connection to the moon's surface and the forces that shaped it over billions of years. You pause on a ridge, taking in the scene. The plains stretch before you, dotted with small craters, rocks, and ridges. The distant mountains rise sharply, their peaks casting long shadows across the landscape. Tiny dust patterns catch your eye, faint lines tracing subtle slopes and micro-elevations. The interplay of light and shadow gives depth to every feature. You feel the immensity of the moon, the scale of its surface, and the clarity of every detail around you. Each step forward continues your survey, mapping the terrain, understanding its features, and connecting your senses to this alien yet familiar world. You reach a small flat area near the base of a gentle slope. The ground here is firm, yet dust rises slightly with each step. You kneel and set down the first instrument, a small seismometer designed to record vibrations in the lunar crust. Its base is wide and stable, and you feel the subtle resistance as you press it lightly into the regolith. Adjusting its legs carefully, you make sure it sits perfectly level. The dust shifts beneath your hands, settling into tiny ridges around the instrument. You can sense the weight of the equipment, though gravity is light, and the interaction between your gloved fingers and the mechanical levers requires deliberate, slow movements. Next, you unfold a retroreflector, a delicate panel of mirrors meant to reflect laser light from Earth. You handle it gently, adjusting the angle so that it faces the sky perfectly. The sunlight catches the surface, glinting sharply against the mirrors. You watch as a faint reflection of yourself appears, distorted but bright, and you realize how precise the alignment must be for laser measurements to travel across the vast distance to Earth and back. Each adjustment is careful. You feel the tiny clicks as the levers lock into place, the tactile sensation transmitted through your gloves. Dust lightly settles on the edges of the instrument, yet you avoid disturbing its surface as you finish positioning it. Nearby, a solar wind detector awaits placement. You lift it slowly, feeling the material in your gloved hands, and position it flat against the lunar soil. Its thin surface glints in the sunlight, and you watch how shadows fall across it, subtle but revealing the texture of its panel. You adjust small arms to secure it, feeling the slight resistance as the joints lock. The dust shifts beneath your palms and feet, yet the instrument stands firm, ready to collect particles carried from the sun. You imagine the invisible stream of charged particles flowing through space and how this device will capture them for analysis. Each motion is deliberate, precise, a tactile dialogue with the moon's surface and your tools. As you step back, you hear the faint hum of data feedback transmitted through your suit's radio. Small indicators flicker on the instruments, confirming their positions and alignment. You watch the signals pulse in real time, a reminder that your work here is connected to Earth. The measurements are being recorded and relayed instantly. The seismometer rests quietly, ready to record the slightest vibration from meteoroid impacts or lunar tremors. The retroreflector aligns perfectly with Earth-based lasers, its precision crucial for measuring the exact distance to the Moon. The solar wind detector waits silently, prepared to capture particles that will tell scientists about the Sun's composition and activity. Each instrument is a bridge between your hands on the Moon and knowledge across space. You step lightly around the instruments, observing shadows that stretch across the dust. The Sun is low enough that the angles reveal subtle undulations in the ground, small ridges and depressions that were previously hidden. Tiny dust particles shift with your movement, falling slowly in low gravity. You notice how each instrument interacts with its environment. The seismometer's base settles into the soil. The retroreflector casts a small, sharp shadow. The solar wind detector glints with reflected sunlight. Thermal effects are subtle but present. The sunlight warms the panels slightly, and you can feel a faint difference in temperature through the glove's padding. These effects remind you that even in the stillness of space, physical forces are at play constantly. You return to the seismometer, adjusting a small lever to fine-tune its sensitivity. The tactile feedback through your gloves is precise, giving you confidence in the alignment. You step back and watch the indicator lights blink in response, confirming the adjustment. You imagine the thousands of miles of Earth listening to this tiny device, its recordings capturing vibrations that would otherwise go unnoticed. Each movement, each adjustment, is both a physical interaction and a scientific observation. The Moon's surface is quiet, yet through this instrument, it will speak in subtle tremors and quakes, revealing its inner structure. Next, you check the retroreflector alignment. You nudge it slightly, observing the shadow shift and the faint reflection on the surface. Even a tiny adjustment changes the way light will bounce back to Earth. You notice dust clinging to the edges, fine particles that drift slightly in low gravity. The tactile sensation of moving the adjustment lever is delicate, requiring a controlled motion to prevent tipping. Once aligned, the reflector stands firm, a silent beacon for lasers shot from Earth, capable of measuring the Moon's distance to millimeters. You feel the responsibility of handling such precise equipment, aware of how these small movements have far-reaching effects in scientific study. The solar wind detector is next. You lift the cover and adjust the angle slightly to catch the particle stream from the Sun most effectively. The surface glints in the sunlight, and you feel the fine resistance of the adjustment lever under your gloved fingers. You step back and watch dust settle around the panel, observing how even minor disturbances in low gravity create faint, slow-moving motions in the regolith. You imagine particles traveling millions of miles from the Sun being captured here, and think about the physics of this collection. Each action is tactile, visual, and scientific all at once, connecting your movements to unseen phenomena in space. You move between instruments, observing data indicators and environmental responses. Shadows shift as the Sun moves across the lunar sky, giving new perspectives on subtle slopes and dust patterns around the equipment. You notice how the light plays across the edges of rocks nearby, how the dust shifts with your approach, and how temperature changes are visible only in the way sunlight glints differently on metallic surfaces. Each movement you make is careful, deliberate, yet natural. A dialogue between your body, the instruments, and the Moon's surface. You feel the weightlessness subtly as you adjust your stance. The feedback from boots and gloves guiding each precise motion. Stepping slightly away, you observe the instruments together as a system. The seismometer waits to record. The retroreflector aligns perfectly with Earth, and the solar wind detector shines in the sun. Dust has settled around them. Shadows define their shapes, and sunlight reflects off panels in subtle flashes. You feel the importance of this work, the quiet contribution of your hands to the larger scientific enterprise. Every adjustment, every placement, every alignment has meaning. You see the moon not only as a surface to walk on, but as a laboratory, a place where the smallest details reveal vast knowledge. You kneel to adjust the seismometer's legs again, feeling the compacted regolith under each point of contact. Tiny vibrations from your movements are sensed immediately, yet the instrument remains stable, ready to record any natural tremor in the lunar crust. You glance up at the horizon, seeing distant hills and ridges, the vast plains that you crossed earlier. The instruments sit in this landscape, integrated into the surface, each shadow, angle, and reflection, a part of the physical and scientific environment. You imagine scientists on Earth watching data streams, correlating every signal, interpreting the subtle messages from this silent world. You take a few steps to the solar wind detector, brushing a finger against its protective surface to remove a small dust particle. The tactile feedback is delicate, requiring slow, careful movement. You adjust its position slightly, watching how shadows shift as the sun climbs higher. Dust moves faintly around the edges in response, settling slowly in low gravity. You feel the interplay of your hands, the instrument, and the lunar environment, each connected in a precise, observable chain. The sunlight highlights the tiny particles, casting shadows across the surface that reveal the subtle texture of the surrounding dust and rocks. As you move around the instruments, you take note of their placement in relation to each other. Distances are precise, angles carefully calculated. You step lightly between the devices, feeling the firmness of the regolith underfoot and the light resistance of dust as it shifts. Shadows elongate and shorten, creating a dynamic map of shapes across the surface. Each instrument responds to its environment. Reflections, thermal expansion, and dust movement are all observable. You feel connected to these processes, your actions bridging the gap between tactile engagement and scientific observation. Finally, you stand back and survey the work you have done. The seismometer, retroreflector, and solar wind detector form a small scientific outpost. Dust settles gently around their bases, shadows stretch across the lunar plain, and sunlight glints off metallic surfaces. You notice the faint movements of dust in low gravity, subtle thermal effects, and the way shadows highlight micro-topography around each instrument. You feel the precision of your work, the care in placement, and the direct interaction with this world. Every step, adjustment, and observation has brought the instruments to life in their quiet, essential task: recording, reflecting, and capturing knowledge from the moon. You stop walking for a moment, letting your body settle in the low gravity, your boots lightly pressing into the fine dust beneath you. You take a slow breath, though it feels more like a rhythm of your suit systems than a natural inhale, and you lift your eyes to the vast lunar panorama before you. The plains stretch endlessly, grey and subtle in texture, dotted with small craters and scattered rocks that mark countless impacts over billions of years. You notice the dust patterns, ridges, and depressions, each catching sunlight at a different angle. The contrast is sharp, shadows long and defined, edges crisp against the bright lunar surface. You let your gaze travel from one feature to another, observing how small details merge into larger structures, a landscape both alien and strangely orderly. The mountains rise jagged in the distance, their peaks uneven and striking against the horizon. You watch the shadows that climb their slopes, shifting slowly as the sun moves across the sky. The highlands are pale, almost white, while the valleys and craters between them are darker, soft grey shadows contrasting against the light. You follow the ridges with your eyes, tracing each peak, imagining the forces that pushed and fractured the surface so long ago. You step slightly to adjust your position, dust shifting beneath your boots, letting your body balance against subtle slopes, feeling the moon's gentle pull underfoot. The terrain beneath you is solid, yet every step is an interaction, every movement a dialogue with the ancient surface. You turn your head slowly, letting your vision sweep across the cratered plains. Each crater tells a story, from tiny pits barely a foot across to larger depressions several meters wide. You see subtle layering in the ejecta around them, lines of dust and rocks radiating outward, evidence of impacts from meteoroids and asteroids over eons. The light emphasizes the texture, the depth of each depression, the sharpness of each rim. You take a deep moment to notice how even the smallest differences in elevation cast precise shadows, how subtle ridges and depressions create patterns across the landscape that are visible only in this stark, unfiltered sunlight. Every detail is readable, every nuance observable in the clarity provided by the lack of atmosphere. You shift your attention upward and see Earth hanging in the black sky above. Its blue and white surface glows vividly, clouds swirling over oceans and continents. You watch as it slowly rotates, the patterns of color changing subtly as land masses and weather move beneath the atmosphere. It seems distant, yet intimately visible, a reminder of home suspended in the void. You let your eyes trace the edges of continents, the outline of oceans, and the bright reflection of clouds. The contrast between Earth and the stark grey lunar surface is striking. You sense the vast emptiness around you, the isolation of this landscape, yet Earth appears alive, slowly turning and radiating colour against the unbroken blackness. You feel the silence surrounding you. There is no wind, no sound of animals, no rustle of leaves or water. Even your own movements create only faint vibrations transmitted through your boots and suit. The absence of atmosphere means that every footstep is isolated, every sound internal. You sense the stillness in a way that is almost physical, pressing against your chest through the subtle vibrations in your body. Shadows stretch across the plains, long and uninterrupted, moving imperceptibly with the sun. Time feels different here. You measure it not with clocks, but with light and shadow, the slow shift of illumination across the terrain, the rotation of Earth above, the subtle movement of your body across the surface. Your eyes travel across distant ridges, following the jagged line of mountains that define the horizon. You notice the way sunlight glances off their uneven surfaces, catching small crags and fractures. Each peak and valley is distinct, defined not only by height, but by the angles of slopes, the depth of shadow, and the texture of exposed rock. The color is mostly gray, but subtle differences appear where fine dust has collected, where basalt or anorthosite is exposed, where the sun catches crystalline grains. You take in the scale, letting your mind measure distances and elevations visually. The mountains are vast, the plains even more so, and you feel the breadth of this silent world spreading before you. You crouch slightly, letting your eyes move along the smaller features in the foreground. Tiny rocks glint in the sunlight. Dust forms faint ripples from settling after your steps, and shallow depressions mark previous impacts. You notice micro-variations in texture and color, subtle shadows that reveal miniature ridges and slopes invisible from a distance. You reach down and touch a small pebble with the edge of your glove, feeling its rough texture, the jagged grains that have survived countless collisions. You let the light play over it, observing how each crystalline face catches the sun differently. Even the smallest stone contributes to the panorama, a microcosm of the larger lunar story. Standing, you take a few slow steps, allowing your body to feel the gentle pull of gravity as you move over small ridges and depressions. You notice how your shadow stretches across the plain, elongated in the low sun, your figure a dark silhouette against the bright surface. The movement of shadow over terrain accentuates details you may have overlooked. Subtle slopes, faint ejecta lines, tiny pebbles scattered across the regolith. Each step is measured, deliberate, your motion interacting with the lunar surface in a way that is both physical and observational. You feel the interplay of weight, gravity, and surface texture. The moon responding to your presence, while remaining unchanged for billions of years. You pause again to look at Earth. Its rotation is slow, mesmerizing, a living contrast to the stillness below. You notice the curvature of the planet, the division between light and dark across continents, the subtle reflection of clouds in sunlight. The color is vivid, almost startling against the black sky and gray surface. You trace patterns of storms, ocean currents, and continents, feeling connected to this distant world even as you stand alone on another. The sight emphasizes both distance and scale, the vastness of space separating you physically from home, yet the clarity of your vision bridging that divide. You feel both isolation and connection simultaneously. The panorama stretches further. You let your eyes sweep across ridges, plains, craters, and distant mountains. Shadows highlight details. Sunlight reveals subtle color differences in rocks and dust, and micro-topography becomes evident as your perspective shifts. You notice how the lack of atmosphere sharpens everything, edges crisp, light unfiltered. You see small pebbles, fractured rocks, ridges in the dust, and shallow depressions, each contributing to the composition of the landscape. The scale is immense, yet readable. Every feature a record of impacts, shifts, and the moon's long, unchanging history. You take a slow step forward, letting your body adjust to the gentle pull of gravity. Dust moves faintly under your boots, settling in subtle patterns. You notice small craters at your feet, layered, ejecta, and tiny shadows that accentuate subtle slopes. Each movement provides tactile feedback, a connection between your senses and the lunar surface. You lift your eyes to the distant mountains again, observing how shadows deepen in valleys and highlight the ridges, giving a three-dimensional sense to the terrain. You feel a sense of space and scale that is both humbling and exhilarating, your mind mapping the vastness before you. You glance at Earth one more time, watching as clouds swirl and the blue oceans shimmer. The contrast with the grey, silent lunar surface is striking. Shadows stretch across the plains and ridges around you, moving slowly as the sun shifts. The surface beneath your boots is firm yet soft in places, dust shifting under gentle pressure. Rocks of various sizes catch the light differently, revealing crystalline textures and fractures. You feel the stillness of the environment, the quiet interaction between light, shadow, and your presence, and the vast scale of the moon's surface stretching endlessly in every direction. Finally, you take a slow, deliberate look around in a complete sweep. The panorama is immense. Craters, ridges, plains, hills, and distant mountains compose a landscape that is both simple and infinitely detailed. Shadows stretch long, angles are sharp, dust patterns reveal subtle textures, and the sun illuminates the surface in high contrast. Earth hangs above, vivid and alive, a reminder of distance and perspective. You feel solitude and presence simultaneously, the moon's stillness settling around you while your body interacts with its surface, moving through its textures, observing its contours, and absorbing its scale. The moment is complete, a pause to fully appreciate the panorama, the science, and the profound silence of this ancient world. You turn slowly, orienting yourself toward the landing site, and take the first measured step across the lunar dust. The bounce in your stride is subtle but constant, a gentle rhythm as you propel yourself forward under 1/6 Earth gravity. Your boots leave clear impressions in the fine regolith, deep enough to mark your presence yet delicate in form, each ridge and pattern visible as you glance back. You notice the tiny dust clouds that rise briefly before settling, like miniature echoes of your movement, and the way the sunlight catches them as they drift, highlighting their almost weightless suspension. Each step is careful, deliberate, conserving energy, your muscles adjusting naturally to the altered pull, while your mind tracks the path back. As you move, you look down at the trail behind you. Your footprints form a line across the plains, each step creating a perfect crescent in the grey dust. The instruments you deployed earlier are visible, their bases disturbed slightly by your earlier adjustments, casting small, sharp shadows on the surface. You trace the path of tiny dust shifts around the seismometer, the retroreflector, and the solar wind detector, appreciating how each action leaves a record, a temporary signature of your presence in this ancient, unchanging world. The tracks of your boots and the disturbed dust around each instrument serve as a visual map of your journey, a sequence of moments frozen on the moon's surface. You take a moment to lift your gaze, scanning the plain stretching between you and the shuttle. The perspective shifts with each step. Hills that seem distant are now closer, their slopes revealing textures and angles not apparent from farther away. Craters, shallow and deep, show layering and shadows that shift subtly with your movement. Small rocks glint in sunlight, creating a pattern of light and dark that gives depth to the landscape. You adjust your stride to account for small ridges and gentle depressions, feeling the feedback of each step through your boots and legs, sensing how the surface responds to weight and motion in the low-gravity environment. Ahead, the landing site comes into view. Its recognizable shape is a visual anchor across the plain, the shuttle appearing slightly elevated, casting a long, dark shadow across the surrounding dust. You notice how the shadow stretches with the sun, emphasizing subtle slopes around the landing area. The instruments lie scattered along your path, markers of your journey, and the prints in the dust trace a pattern that aligns with the survey you conducted earlier. You take in the scale of the distance, measuring the terrain through your own movement and perspective, and your mind calculates the energy required to reach the shuttle without exhausting yourself, each hop and step carefully modulated. You glance back again at the footprints trailing behind you. Each print is unique, showing the weight distribution of your boots and the small variances caused by hopping lightly or landing more firmly. The impressions form a visual record of your exploration, an unbroken line connecting the landing site, the instruments, and the hills you crossed. You notice how the dust shifts around these footprints, settling slowly in low gravity, emphasizing the subtle interplay of surface texture and motion. Tiny particles cling to your boots with each step, leaving faint streaks that catch the sunlight for a brief moment before fading into the grey regolith. Your eyes lift to Earth above the lunar horizon. It appears brighter and slightly larger than before, its blue and white patterns vivid against the black sky. You track its rotation slowly, watching continents and cloud formations shift imperceptibly. The contrast with the lunar surface is striking. Grey plains and jagged mountains frame the vibrant globe above, a reminder of distance and connection. You take a careful step forward, letting your vision sweep over the terrain while your body follows the gentle rhythm of hopping, and feel the balance of movement and observation intertwining seamlessly. As you move, the landscape evolves with each step. Hills that once dominated your view are now receding behind you, the plains stretching ahead toward the shuttle. Shadows shift across shallow depressions and tiny ridges, emphasizing details previously unnoticed. Rocks glint differently as you approach, the sunlight catching jagged edges and crystalline grains. You feel the scale of the moon through both vision and motion, the vastness of the plains contrasted with the intimacy of the details underfoot. Each stride is a careful negotiation with the low gravity, conserving energy while maintaining precision in movement and observation. You step past a small crater, noting the layering of ejecta and the subtle slopes that mark the impact's origin. Your boots glide over dust ridges, and you feel the slight resistance as your weight compresses the surface. Tiny pebbles shift with each step, settling into new positions, marking the ongoing, gentle reshaping of the lunar surface in response to movement. You watch shadows stretch and change across the crater walls, noting angles and depth. The combination of tactile feedback, visual observation, and awareness of low gravity creates a rhythm in your steps, a methodical progression across the plains back to the shuttle. The shuttle grows larger in your view. Its metallic surface reflects sunlight brightly, creating sharp highlights and deep shadows on its legs and body. You note small dust clouds that rise briefly with each hop you take closer, faintly drifting before settling back into the surface. You sense the curvature of the landing site's platform beneath the vehicle, subtle depressions and mounds that were less visible from a distance. As you move, you mentally map the distance covered and the terrain remaining, calculating energy, stride, and time with each motion. The lunar surface offers constant visual feedback, guiding your path through its unbroken expanse. Passing another small chain of craters, you observe the changes in perspective as distance decreases. Shadows that seem subtle from afar now reveal depth and texture. Slopes that were only hinted at become distinct. Dust patterns around rocks and depressions respond to your presence, shifting slightly as your boots disturb the surface. Each footfall leaves a record in the fine regolith, and you take a moment to look back at the path, seeing how footprints, instruments, and tiny disturbances together form a visual record of exploration. You feel the connection between your movement and the physical history you are leaving behind. You adjust your stride to cross a slight ridge, letting your body anticipate the gentle pull of gravity. Each hop carries you forward with minimal effort, the regolith giving slight resistance underfoot. You notice dust patterns around rocks, the way tiny particles have settled into cracks and depressions, forming intricate microtopography. The sunlight highlights these textures, casting small shadows that accentuate ridges and hollows. You feel intimately connected to each feature, your movement both interacting with and observing the lunar surface in a continuous dialogue. As the shuttle comes fully into view, the distant mountains recede, replaced by the immediate plains surrounding the landing site. You observe the instruments you deployed earlier, their shadows shifting with the sun's movement. Dust rests around their bases, disturbed slightly by your passage, but still holding the record of your previous engagement. You take slow steps closer, feeling the subtle gradients in the ground, tiny depressions and ridges underfoot, and the slight unevenness that guides your hopping rhythm. Each motion is measured, aware, and connected to both tactile sensation and visual observation. You glance upward at Earth again. Its blue and white surface appears slightly larger, the rotation revealing continents and oceans in a gentle, continuous motion. The contrast with the grey moon is striking. The vivid colours emphasized against the blackness of space. You feel the pull of perspective, the way distance and scale interact as you move, noting the subtle changes in visual context as the shuttle grows nearer. The lunar surface stretches beneath you, dotted with small rocks and shallow craters, every step adding to your cumulative exploration record. Your stride carries you over shallow depressions, dust shifting softly underfoot. Footprints trail behind you, a map of the journey you have taken across plains, ridges, and crater chains. Each step interacts with microtopography. Small ridges, tiny rocks, and dust patterns respond to your movement. You feel the rhythm of low-gravity locomotion, the interplay between energy conservation, tactile feedback, and visual observation. Every hop is an act of navigation, a physical connection to the terrain, and a contribution to the ongoing story written across the lunar surface in footprints and disturbed dust. You step lightly along the final stretch toward the landing site. The shuttle dominates your view, its shadow stretching over nearby plains. Instruments lie scattered along the path you traveled, dust disturbed subtly around their bases. You notice the interplay of sunlight, shadow, and texture in the regolith beneath your boots, each detail amplified by the clarity of the moon's atmosphere-free environment. You pause briefly, observing the cumulative record of your exploration. Footprints, instruments, and the trail across the plains, each telling a part of the story of this journey. You sense the continuity of time, the measured distance covered, and the careful, methodical connection between movement and observation. As you reach the final approach, the terrain flattens slightly, preparing you for the landing platform. Shadows stretch long, dust lies undisturbed except where your feet have passed, and the instruments reflect sunlight with subtle glints. You take a final, slow step, feeling the tactile feedback of the surface, the gentle resistance of regolith under boots, and the light pull of lunar gravity. You look back one last time at the plains, crater chains, and distant mountains, mentally retracing your route, observing the patterns of footprints and disturbed dust as evidence of your methodical path. The shuttle awaits, your endpoint and anchor, marking the completion of this leg of the mission across the lunar surface. You approach the shuttle slowly, each step deliberate, feeling the subtle dips and rises in the regolith as your boots make contact. The landing legs loom ahead, casting sharp shadows over the nearby dust. You notice the instruments you set up along the way, their shadows now shorter in the shifting light, standing as silent witnesses to your work. The hatch awaits, a metallic portal into the spacecraft, smooth and cool even in the sunlight. You pause for a moment, taking in the panorama one last time. The plains stretching to distant mountains, small craters marked with your footprints, and the scattered dust patterns that trace your journey across this ancient surface. The moon seems both endless and intimately detailed at once. Reaching the hatch, you feel the tactile familiarity of the handhold and latch. Your gloved fingers wrap around the metal, sensing its slight warmth from the sun and the resistance of the mechanism as you pull it open. The interior hum of the shuttle is welcoming, a soft vibration that vibrates through your boots and your body as you step inside. You move carefully to your seat, letting the harness settle around your torso. The straps snug against your body, holding you lightly as gravity shifts beneath your frame. You feel the difference immediately. Your weight is subtly returning, but still less than on Earth. A gentle transition as the moon's pull gives way to the spacecraft's movement. The countdown begins. You notice the controls beneath your fingers, the buttons and levers that will guide your ascent. You sense the tactile feedback of each adjustment, the subtle clicks as you verify switches, confirming alignment and system status. Outside the window, the surface awaits, and you take one last glance down. Craters that once appeared small now stretch into intricate patterns, shadows defining depth and scale. Plains flatten into subtle textures, ridges and small hills blending into the grey expanse. Dust is stirred only by your movements, fine particles catching the sunlight as they drift briefly before settling again. Mountains rise jagged in the distance, their peaks etched sharply against the black sky, and you realize how vast this silent world is from this new perspective. The engines ignite. You feel the first vibrations beneath your body, subtle at first, like a gentle hum traveling through the shuttle's floor and into your boots. The sound is muffled but present, resonating through the cabin. You press slightly into your seat, letting the harness absorb the initial thrust. The lunar surface begins to recede, and you watch closely as shadows shrink. Craters merge into plains, and dust patterns fade beneath your ascending perspective. The gentle bounce of each step you took earlier is replaced by a rising sensation in your chest as the shuttle gains altitude. Your body senses the change in gravity, the weight returning gradually as acceleration increases, yet still different from Earth's pull. From the window, the moon's surface becomes increasingly detailed. You can still see the tiny craters, subtle dust ridges, and scattered rocks you observed up close. Your footprints are faintly visible, tracing a line back to the landing site. The instruments glint softly in the sunlight, their shadows shortening and shifting with your ascent. You notice the way the plains stretch to meet the horizon, the jagged mountain ridges forming a dark silhouette against the bright lunar surface. Each feature stands out with clarity, enhanced by the absence of atmosphere, revealing texture and depth in a way impossible on Earth. You take in the scale, imagining the millions of years of history represented in this panorama. The shuttle continues to rise. The vibration beneath you grows slightly stronger, a reminder of the energy required to leave the moon. You feel the subtle shift in your body as gravity decreases further, floating almost weightlessly for brief moments during adjustment maneuvers. Your hands rest on controls, sensing the fine adjustments needed to maintain trajectory. You watch the surface recede more rapidly, small craters merging into a uniform grey, ridges softening into patterns of light and shadow. Dust clouds dissipate quickly, leaving no trace, while mountains and hills shrink into miniature models. You notice how the perspective changes constantly, a dynamic view revealing both scale and texture simultaneously. Turning your gaze upward, Earth dominates the view above. Its blue oceans and swirling clouds are vivid, striking against the black sky. You observe continents slowly rotating, subtle storms forming and dispersing, and the planet's atmosphere glowing faintly at the edges. Stars appear unobstructed around it, pinpoints of light that shimmer steadily, unaffected by air or weather. You take a deep, slow breath, absorbing the contrast, the living, vibrant Earth, the silent grey moon, and the infinite cosmos beyond. The sense of isolation is balanced by connection. a reminder of how this journey links your presence directly to both celestial neighbors. The shuttle arcs smoothly, and the curvature of the moon becomes more apparent. Plains, craters, and ridges soften into an abstract mosaic, shadows merging into patterns that hint at depth and elevation. You feel the physics of orbital insertion as your trajectory stabilizes, gravity now a balancing act between moon and shuttle. The vibration beneath you becomes steady, a hum of controlled power. You watch as the landing site, once detailed and familiar, becomes a small mark on the surface. Each instrument, each footprint, each dust ripple is now part of a larger mosaic of lunar exploration, the evidence of your careful interaction with this ancient world preserved in memory and observation. You reflect on the scientific significance of this journey. Each footprint, sample, and measurement contributes to understanding the moon's formation, its composition, and its relationship with Earth. You think of the seismometer recording lunar quakes, the retroreflector allowing precise measurement of distance, the solar wind detector capturing particles from the sun. You understand the careful planning behind trajectories, the energy calculations for low-gravity walking, and the importance of every instrument placement. The moon is both laboratory and archive, its surface preserving history, and your actions have added new data to its long story. The shuttle continues upward, and you sense the increasing pull of Earth's gravity as you near lunar orbit. Subtle shifts in weight are noticeable in your body, a gentle reminder of the transition from moon to spacecraft dynamics. You watch the surface fade beneath you, plains and craters merging into grey patterns, mountains shrinking to small ridges. The perspective emphasizes the vastness of the moon, the isolation of its plains, and the interconnectedness of the instruments you deployed with the broader scientific mission. Every detail you observed and recorded becomes part of a larger understanding of lunar geology, impact history, and surface processes. Looking out again at Earth, you see its full sphere, rotating slowly, alive with color and detail. Oceans shimmer in blue, continents contrast against white cloud patterns, and the atmosphere glows faintly at the edges. Stars are scattered beyond, undimmed and sharp, a backdrop of infinite black against which Earth and Moon are suspended. The view is humbling. You reflect on the relationship between these two celestial bodies, the Moon's role in Earth's tides, its stabilizing effect on axial tilt, and its record of solar and meteoroid impacts. You feel the weight of scientific exploration, the responsibility of observation, and the wonder of direct experience in this environment. The shuttle levels into orbit, vibration steady, trajectory stable. You take a slow moment to observe the moon one last time. Craters sharp, plains grey and quiet, mountains etched against shadows. The journey you undertook, walking, observing, measuring, interacting, is now complete, leaving marks in dust, impressions in regolith, and data transmitted to Earth. You sense the continuity of exploration, the ongoing scientific dialogue between human presence and the moon's silent record. Each step was small yet meaningful, contributing to the larger understanding of lunar history, solar system dynamics, and Earth's place in space. Your body feels the full effect of orbital weightlessness now. The moon's gravity diminished, replaced by controlled motion within the shuttle. You float slightly as you adjust your position, the tactile feedback of controls and seats confirming orientation. The panorama outside continues to shift as the shuttle orbits, the moon receding, Earth prominent, stars constant. You reflect on how this experience integrates observation, movement, and understanding. The physical interaction with surface, the deployment of instruments, the careful path across craters and plains, and the scientific significance of each action. Finally, you lean back slightly in your seat, letting your body and mind absorb the journey's entirety. The moon is behind you, Earth ahead, stars surrounding. Instruments, footprints, dust disturbances, and subtle shadows now belong to memory and transmitted data, preserved in observation and measurement. You feel the calm rhythm of orbit, the gentle vibration of engines, and the connection between past exploration, present experience, and future understanding. You notice how subtle shifts in light and perspective reveal details continuously, the moon's surface offering endless information, even as it recedes beneath you. You let your eyes linger on Earth, appreciating the vivid blues and whites, the rotation, the clouds, the continents. Stars shimmer sharply, the black sky deep and vast. You reflect on the cumulative significance of your work, collecting samples, recording data, observing microtopography, studying craters, mapping shadows, deploying instruments, and experiencing low gravity. The moon's role in Earth history, in the solar system, and in human exploration is clear. You feel the intersection of tactile experience, scientific observation, and the profound scale of celestial mechanics, all converging in this moment above the lunar surface. The shuttle completes its initial orbit insertion. Vibrations are gentle, almost imperceptible, yet you feel the subtle shift of gravity and momentum as the spacecraft settles into a stable path. You allow your body to adjust, floating lightly in your harness, watching Earth and moon, stars and shadow, movement and stillness. You reflect on the significance of lunar exploration for understanding planetary formation, solar system history, and the Earth-Moon relationship. Each step you took, each observation, and each instrument deployed contributes to humanity's broader knowledge, a lasting imprint of exploration and science. Finally, you close your eyes briefly, letting the experience settle in your mind. You can feel the vibration of the engines, the light pull of gravity, the memory of the dust beneath your boots, the visual panorama of mountains, plains, and craters, and the vivid presence of Earth above. You sense the slow rhythm of orbit, the gentle hum of the shuttle, and the stillness of the moon fading beneath you. The journey, the observations, and the reflections coalesce into a single, immersive experience, leaving you aware of scale, distance, and the quiet beauty of this ancient world. You breathe slowly, letting your body and mind absorb the entirety of what you have seen and done, feeling both connection and solitude, awareness and wonder.